Hey guys, welcome back to the channel where we discuss all things behind the scenes when it comes to my career as a classicist as well as an author now, public talks, all of that kind of thing. This is what this channel is for. My name is Erica, obviously that's the name of the channel, but I primarily upload onto a channel which is called MoAn Inc, which discusses all things ancient Greece and Rome. But today I was getting loads of questions after my previously uploaded video, which was a Q&A about my book, The Odyssey Effect, How Homer's Epic Poem Shaped the World. And so many people were asking me what it means to have a publisher reach out to you to write a book and what that whole process looks like. So I thought that we would do like a super chill conversation just expanding on that, because I didn't realize that so many people would want to know more about this. I didn't realize that people didn't know that this was a part of publishing that could happen. So with that being said, go and grab a cup of tea. I have a cup of coffee and I have a straw so I don't spill it on myself because I'm wearing white. But go grab a cup of tea because we need to get comfortable to talk about this. Okay, I'm ready to go. So, if you guys are tuning in for the first time, the way this book came to me was because the publishers had the idea and they sought somebody out to write the book. That book is not my idea. I've been very vocal about saying this is not a book that I thought of. It's not like my baby. It's not something where I wrote it for years and years and I had to go to an agent and they had to go to a publisher's and we had nothing like that. So this is actually something that happens quite a bit. And the way that this happens is one of two ways. So I do just kind of want to start by being like, hey, in case you want this to happen to you, you should be aware you got to have one of these two things or both of these things. So you either need to have status in your industry, which does not mean that you need to have followers. It does not mean that you need to have medals or anything like that. It just means that you need to be known in your industry for a thing. Now, the other way that you can get a publisher to pitch to you is the way that I did, which is simply by being known for something and having a following. So I hate saying that that's a really important thing, but I don't think that the publishers would have ever come to me if I didn't have a following on any of the platforms, I think. Genuinely, I think if one of my platforms was really low, they probably would have gone to somebody else. At the time the publishers pitched to me, I had like 30,000 subscribers on YouTube. I think I had about 11K on Instagram, if I'm remembering correctly, as well as having like 10K on TikTok. Okay, so I had across all three platforms quite a few followers. Obviously on TikTok and Instagram, that's significantly lower. Now, at the time of recording, I now have 50,000 subscribers on YouTube, as well as having 20,000 on TikTok, and I think I have just under 20K. I don't think I hit 20K today, but like I'm nearly at 20K on Instagram. So now I have even more of a following. The publishers clearly knew that in looking at my previous following. And what I was most well known for a year and a half ago, the most watched videos on my channel were videos about Homeric poetry. So I had summarized the Iliad and the Odyssey, and undoubtedly those were getting me most of my viewership, most of my comments, and most of my engagement. So it was natural that they came to me about a book about the Odyssey because, okay, well, I have a follower list to sell to, but I also have the people who are directly engaging with Homeric poetry to some degree. And the way that I present history online is very much for beginners. I'm not doing this whole like, here are all of these intricate details kind of a thing. I'm just like, just enjoy it. Then I will pass you off to an expert. Then you can go and read this book, which is more in depth. My video is very much surface level and all of my videos are designed to be surface level or summaries, right? That's the intention. So this book very much matched me. I got it through the following count thing and I got it through the idea that I already speak about this thing constantly on camera. Now from this moment, I'm just going to say, from what I'm going to be talking about, it's all personal experience. So do not compare this story to anybody else's story. Do not say, oh, because Erica had a really positive experience, this person who's complaining about their negative experience is lying or whatever it is. I'm just going to tell you what my experience was like from this point on, which was very positive and was very good. And I hope that if you want to have books pitched to you by a publisher, that you will have the same experience. And I hope that in me telling you this story, you then can kind of get a gauge of like what to expect and what to ask for and those sorts of things when it comes to your contract. Because I don't have an agent. I read everything and handled everything business-wise myself. And therefore, I have a bit more of an understanding of the things that I knew and the things that I was aware of, but also things that I didn't really understand, even though I had read the words on the page. To start off with, I do just want to say, when you are asked to write a book, the publishers don't come to you with a general idea. So the publishers didn't come to me and say, we want a book about the Odyssey because Christopher Nolan is releasing a film in a year and a half. So can you have some time to think about what the book would be about? No, no, no. The publishers came to me with a title for the book, which at the time was The Odyssey of the Odyssey. Thank God they changed that because I do not like the idea of having the Odyssey twice in the title. The Odyssey Effect, which is the name of my book currently, is the cutest thing. And I was so excited when they decided that that would be the title. But they gave me a title and they gave me a somewhat plan. The plan wasn't in writing, the title was in writing. But the plan they gave me through a Zoom call. So I sat down with the heads of the project and they said, this is the kind of book that we want. And this is how we want it to be split up. And this is the kind of length. It's going to be illustrated, blah, 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 blah. There were things that I knew before I signed on to the book that were going to have to be the way that the publishers wanted. So even when it came to the way the chapters were broken up, I did have a bit of a say in this when it came to, so they said, you've got to start with talking about Homer's world and then in the ancient Greeks and then move through each and every moment of history. And I signed on to the book saying, sure. However, when it came to the first chapter, they wanted me to do all of ancient Greece in one chapter. And I was like, that's not gonna work. I was like, we're gonna have to have 2 chapters for that. And they were very receptive to that. Thank God. Because I have heard stories where publishers have been very rigid and my publishers were phenomenal. Like, when they gave me the plan for the book, and although I came up with a detailed plan, they gave me that overarching plan and I made notes during that meeting and everything. They were very receptive when I would say, I don't know if that's necessarily going to work, or I don't think that this is maybe going to read historically the way that you want it to. Ultimately, it was their idea. This is something that you need to be aware of. If you're signing on for a project that is a publisher's book, it is their idea. Now, obviously, the more books that you do like this, the more say you'll have. This was my first rodeo. I was very aware I had to pick my battles. And I knew that somewhere along the way, because this is just who I am, I was going to dig in my heels about something. And because of that, I was like, okay, Erica, if you are slightly okay with things, just be okay with them. And again, this was before I signed the contract. So I was aware of all of these things. And then I was sent the contract and I saw all of this in writing. There was nothing in my entire experience with Quarto that was a surprise. They have been incredibly talkative with me, very communicative. Even sometimes I felt that Quarto were like over communicating with me to make sure that I understood exactly what I was signing on for, which is the dream scenario. Like, I couldn't have asked for a better publisher. I have to say, in a joke that I've been making, is either I'm the worst author or I'm the best author, because I didn't ask as many questions as I think I should have. Simply because, like I said, I didn't understand certain things of the contract. So in the contract and in the book, there are things called sidebars, which I assumed was going to be on the side of a page. And then I found out through this whole experience, even though they were like, oh, do you, and I have this on email, they kept saying, do you understand what a sidebar is, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, why wouldn't I understand what a sidebar is? I did not understand what a sidebar was. A sidebar in Quarto's land is that they are chunks of the text that they can take and they can sort of rove around. And so therefore, when I saw like the final printed version, which I now have the PDF of, there were chunks that were just kind of taken and moved. And I was like, oh, shit, that's a sidebar. I should have asked more questions. I shouldn't have assumed it was going to be literally on the side of the page. When they kept asking if I needed an explanation, they would be happy to give me one. That was totally like my fault. So in that instance, your contract, when you're writing a book for a publisher, is going to be very, very explanatory. Okay, they are going to want to communicate with you and make sure that you understand what you're signing up for. So I knew that my book was going to have to be split up in a certain way. I knew that my book was going to be 40,000 words. Again, that's in the contract. But I was also aware that I wasn't going to have necessarily the final say in the book, because due to this being a very big collaboration between me, the publishers, their idea and their team of what the book has to be, and the illustrator, it meant that there had to be a third party that wasn't really involved in all of these. I presume was part of the big project, but wasn't like, didn't have their nose in it, that was going to have to make those final calls. And I signed that in the contract. I was very happy. In fact, due to the extreme timeline that I had, because when I signed the contract, I had 3 months to produce 40,000 words and make it readable. And I am so thankful that that was in my contract, that it was like, as soon as I handed it off, it was theirs. I didn't have to think about it. When I was writing, all I was doing was the words. That was it. And it was made very, very clear. Somebody else would take it and then they would figure out how the illustrations work. They would figure out how the pages looked. all of that kind of stuff. And all they did after that was they kind of said, are you happy with this? And I was like, yeah. So for me, and I do want to stress this was the perfect project. It was knowledge that I knew, and it was in a very controlled environment with very strict deadlines because the film was coming out this summer, and because the illustrator had to have their time with the book, and because the team had to have their time with the book, and because the marketing team had to have their time with the book, that I only had a very small window with the words. And again, I knew all of that going into it, and that's why I signed on to do it. It's not like when you write a fiction book, you have all the time in the world in your spare time to write the book. Then you find an agent and then they pitch it to a publisher. And maybe, when you're doing edits, you need to push back a deadline or whatever it is. You have that flexibility when it's your book. My book did not. And the majority of people that I've spoken to who have been pitched a book by a publisher, they also have had the same experience. So do not sign on to a book like this if you are not flexible. If you do not have the ability to actually write under these pressured deadlines, doing writing like this is probably not for you, and publications like this is probably not for you. Also, you need to be a little bit more creative, like something that I wasn't really aware of until I think maybe like the last month that I had the book, was how creative I was going to have to be with including everything that I wanted. Simply because the publishers had a very long list, not in my contract, but communicated to me over the 3 months, of things that they wanted to see in the book. So because my job was to track the inception of the Odyssey, or track the history of the Odyssey from its inception to modern day, I had to look at all of these different retellings and reception of it. And there were things that I wanted to include that then when I would say this to my editor would email me back and be like, you are not including, like no one gives a fuck about that. And we're trying to sell this to newbies. That is for an expert book. No, that's not going in there. Equally, I was getting emails that were like, hey, don't forget to include Percy Jackson. Hey, don't forget to include, for example, the Arthur episode that I just recently reacted to on MoAn Inc. I had no idea that existed until last August. I got a random email from my was it in August or was it after the first edit? I'm not sure. I think it was after the first edit, actually. I think I lied. That I had written part that was about the SpongeBob SquarePants film, and my editor was like, that's really good. Why haven't you mentioned Arthur? And I was like, what Arthur? And she sent me the link to the YouTube video and was like, there is an Arthur episode. We are an American publishers. They will all have known this episode. You need to write about this episode. And I was like, aye, Captain. And so I included that. I also didn't know that the Smurfs did their own episode of the Odyssey until my publishers told me to write about that, and again, sent me the link to watching it. There were lots of other books that I had to include that the publishers made very clear that I had to include. There were even some things, like when I was talking about film and TV, and I was like, oh, film and TV adaptation, my editor was like, well, you can't mention this without talking about McCarthyism. And I was like, the fuck is McCarthyism? Like, there were so many things like that. Because this is a collaboration, that there were sentences thrown in there that my editor were like, that has to be in there. You can Erica-ify it if you want to, but you need to include this. Or, big sections that we would take things out and we would replace with what they wanted. And when I say I had to be creative, because of this, there were things that then didn't fit in chapters. So things that I did deem as rather important, or I really wanted to include for myself, that because I had to include all these other things, we exceeded the word count in that chapter. So I have 2 examples of this where I had to figure out things that were supposed to be in one chapter, but I included them in a later chapter, which is quite confusing. And also it's because, again, we don't have these specialized chapters. They're just kind of these really broad chapters that either side of the chapter would kind of be a bit fuzzy, the way I would describe it. So even though I talk about like ancient Greece and Rome, I'm like, yeah, I do talk about ancient Greece and Rome, but the years for things are kind of fuzzy on either side, where I'm like, basically it's this, but because I want to talk about this thing, and that's kind of technically before this, and that's kind of technically after this, it has to be in this chapter because it can't fit in the other one. So an example of this is I really wanted to discuss this very, very famous Stamnos that depicts Odysseus and the Sirens. To me, it was a non-negotiable that it goes in the book. Now, to have a random description of a pot in a book, yeah, my editor was like, no. I think I did like 2 pots in the first chapter, and then to discuss the Stamnos, she was like, you were really like beating this dead horse. Like, absolutely, we're not doing this. Change gears, do theater, change gears, do this, blah, blah, whatever. But I really want to talk about the Stamnos. And so what I ended up doing was including it in a much later chapter where he spoke about the British Museum and how in the British Museum began, right? So when it first opened its doors, it had lots of these antiquities from Greece. And then I literally have a moment where I'm like, we are going to talk about one antiquity from Greece that the British Museum acquired technically 100 years after it opened, which is not in this time period, but I am the author and I decide when we discuss things and I want to talk about this part, and I managed to shoehorn it into this chapter where it absolutely shouldn't have been, but I needed that pot to be in the book. As a classicist, I was like, I cannot write about this story without writing about this pot. So I had to get creative in that sense. And the other one, which is a good example, was we have a Victorian chapter. And I was like, well, the thing I want to talk about is technically not Victorian, and it's technically Georgian. So as somebody, if you guys have stuck around for a while, you'll know that my dream, personally, was not that I wanted to be a classicist when I grew up. I wanted to be a circus performer, which I say with the utmost seriousness. I am somebody that trained 20 hours a week in aerial arts because I legitimately thought I was going to be in Cirque du Soleil, and then I got injured. Long story short, whatever. Anywho, so I really wanted to include this circus poster that I've loved for the longest time, and to me it's one of the most special artifacts to come from this time period, right? This Georgian time, this circus history, because it combines my two loves in one. And the idea that it wasn't Victorian broke my heart, but I was like, I am going to put it in this chapter if it's the last thing that I do. And so the poster is dated to 1833. And the Victorian era technically doesn't begin until 1837. Okay, just to make things clear. I knew that writing the book, but I segued it in because we talk about theatre in that chapter. And I said there are lots of different kinds of theatre, and the circus, and this is true, has a real heyday in the Victorian era. So Philip Astley's circus technically begins in the 1700s, but it lasts until the end of the 1800s. Like 1890, I think, is when Philip Astley's circus, which is the birth of the modern idea of the circus, runs to. And the circus poster being from 1833, I was like, since the Victorians loved the circus, I can absolutely include it here. And there was a sentence attached to this, which is like, it's technically not the Victorian era, but because the years are so close and because the Victorians love the circus, we're going to talk about this poster. So, you know, you're kind of matching things up and trying to be creative with things, which ended up making the book actually a lot more fun for me because I got to find all of these different segues and doors to kind of like throw things in that didn't fit in one chapter and did fit in the other one. I'm not the only one to have this experience. Again, the more that I've spoken about my experience with books, the more people who have done projects like this have said, oh my God, I had to do the same thing. And I did it in this way, or I did this. But that was really like the whole, I would say the trickiness of writing the book was it is much more collaborative than just writing a book. Up until even this stage, like I did just record my audiobook, I had some surprises. And I did get an email. It's funny, I got an email back in like November or December that was like, hey, we have some extra space, and so we're adding in these things. And I think I just replied saying, okay, not really understanding what that meant. And then I saw the final PDF of the book when I'm recording the audiobook, and I was like, oh my God. Here is an actual live reaction to me seeing a paragraph that I did not anticipate was going to be in the book. Oh, wow, that's in the book? Is that also with, like, oh my God, that probably reads horrendously. Well, I mean, it is. They put it in there. I just don't have it because it never got an edit. So how should we do this? Yeah. I have my laptop. Okay. I am so glad that I have, like, this is just one of the many videos that I have from recording where I was like, what do you mean this paragraph is in there? And that's not to say that I'm upset those paragraphs are in there. For example, the one that I'm talking about in that video, I'm actually happy that it's in there. What I'm more so reacting to is the fact it didn't get an edit. One that I was like, I wish that I had been able to edit that because I think I would have been able to word it slightly better. There was one paragraph, for instance, I remember when they had read it and they had sort of looked at them and looked at my voice that I was writing in, they said, oh, we don't think that that paragraph is going to work. So I really wanted to include it, but I was happy to not include it. So I'm thrilled even more so that it's in the final book. But again, like you just kind of wish that you had that final edit. So maybe if you guys are signing on to do something like this in the future, that's something that I think I would have asked for. And I think that's sort of the core of all of this, is that when you sign on to do a project, you need to constantly be aware that it is somebody else's project. You are part of a team, okay? You are part of a team that constructs a book, and you are only one portion of that. And actually, I have to say, in seeing the PDF, I think it all works really well. I think, you know, they made all of the right calls. Of course, they know what they're doing. And it only works because I, as the author, am very flexible and understood where I was. You know, I understood exactly what my role was. I understood how this book is going to come out. I'm very happy to be a part of it, but I am also very understanding in the idea that I am one small cog in a very big machine. And so that I think is overall, I mean, again, my story is very positive and this video is long enough, so I'm gonna wrap it up here. And if you guys want any more detail, I can obviously add because this isn't everything. But when it comes to my experience with doing a book like this, it suited me really well. It suited me at the time because I had the free time to dedicate everything to this book. I also read my contract and knew exactly what was expected of me. I am not somebody who's a perfectionist either. So when there are little sentences that are changed, and I do read the book, you know, when I was reading the audiobook and seeing things that were changed, I was like, oh, that wasn't me. But you know what? I think that's okay. And I did sign that away, and that's completely fine. So I do just want to wrap this up by saying that if you are someone who is similar to me, this kind of a career will really suit you, because I was never going to come up with a book idea myself. But also, I think if I had come up with the book idea myself, I would have been much more anal about how things were worded and it being perfect and all of this. Knowing that I'm part of a team, knowing that I signed up for something that I'm very happy to be a part of, knowing what my role was in all of this and happily handing it over to the correct person after that made this a very enjoyable experience. I was very much in the know of absolutely everything. I was very much I was communicated with overly so by the publishers. And I feel like we worked incredibly well together to create this book. It's not just mine and it's not just theirs. I really do feel like it has become this wonderful project that all of us have been thrown in on, including Paul Cartledge, who wrote my introduction, who, bear in mind, we didn't know we were going to have an introduction. And then a week before they were going to send it to the illustrator, my publishers emailed me and they were like, hey, do you want an introduction? Because we have the extra pages, but they need to hand it in 5 days. And I emailed Paul and he wrote this thing in one sitting, and I'm in the airport literally sending him these emails. He sends it to me. I then have to send it to my publisher. They then edit it. This will happen in 5 days, guys. They then edited it, sent it back to Paul. Again, I'm trying to get through immigration in Switzerland. Like, the whole thing was so wonderful. And I've had such an incredible experience with Corto in doing this, but I simply wouldn't recommend it to everybody. My advice is to be very self-aware, is to know what you want and what you require from these kinds of experiences, to know what kind of support you would need, and to know what kind of academic or writer you want to be. If you're happy to let go of control, this is something that's really going to suit you. And I think you should absolutely strive to get the following or to get the status to be allowed to do a project like this. Because I think this is absolutely a project that I would do time and time and time again. Like, I would do it tenfold if it meant having as wonderful as experience as I have now. And I'm so excited for you guys to get your hands on the book. Thank you for everybody who has supported me up until this point, people who have pre-ordered already. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll be seeing you next time with more videos here on the channel. I'll see you then.